if there's one thing that we want everyone to understand here, is we look at rural Idaho and we understand the strong economic vitality of rural Idaho. And that vitality is there is because of agriculture. What we fail to sometimes recognize as society is that value is because of our labor force. So if you look specifically at the dairy industry, we have roughly 8,100 employees in the dairy industry. The vast majority of those employees, in our own estimation, would say 85% are Hispanic and foreign-born labor, and they bring value. So you look at the 10.4 billion economic indicators of the dairy industry and what it does for the state of Idaho. If you look at the 160 million we pay in taxes and all sorts of taxes, that all stands on the shoulders of foreign-born labor. We've worked for the last decade on trying to get immigration reform accomplished. And we're here because we haven't succeeded in that. But it's time that there is success. We have an opportunity under the current administration, who's elevated the debate on immigration, to work towards sound, sensible immigration reform. And so we appreciate all of you being here. We do have two faces up here that weren't identified on your notice. One is Juan, who's filling in for Margie today, and the other one is Priscilla Salant. Priscilla has done a lot of work on looking at the value of foreign-born labor and the economic impact, and she's going to explain a little bit about that study. So thank you very much again for joining us.
So on behalf of the Idaho Commission on Hispanic Affairs, we really want to thank the Idaho Dairymen's Association for putting all this together today. It was a great lunch that we had where we were able to pull in leaders from around the state, Hispanic leaders from around the state, to come and have an open dialogue, which was really important to us. And we're going to continue doing these kind of forums throughout the state to talk about this issue. It's a very important issue that needs to be talked about, discussed. So we're really fortunate that we have partners like the McClure Center and the Idaho Dairymen's Association. This, like Mr. Naerebout said, about 85% of the people who do work in the ag field are Hispanic, and that's something, and that's who we represent. And we want to make sure that everybody's being treated fairly, that there's some kind of sensible reform that's being put out there. And we want to make sure that our people feel protected. And so that's what we're here for. But we will be throughout the summer. We're going to be traveling extensively through a lot of rural Idaho to be putting on a lot of these forums throughout the state. So thank you.
Thank you. My name is Priscilla Salant. I'm recently retired from the University of Idaho, and I'm here today to report briefly on a study that we conducted at the McClure Center for Public Policy Research at the University of Idaho. The study is an update of one we conducted in 2008, 2009, just as Idaho was coming out of the recession. And the focus of both studies was to look at the impact of the dairy industry's workforce on communities in Idaho. In particular, the study that we just released last week on Thursday was in particular to look at the impact of the foreign-born labor force in the Magic Valley itself and the communities in the Magic Valley. There are about 5,000 workers in the dairy industry in the Magic Valley. That's on the production side, the milk production side. Another 2,000 workers in the Magic Valley in the milk processing side. And the bottom line from our report in terms of how this workforce impacts communities is that on balance, there are tremendous economic benefits from this workforce. The people who work on dairy farms are experienced, they're trained, they're largely foreign-born, and many of them have families and are well integrated into the communities of the Magic Valley. They've moved to communities, purchased homes, sent their children to schools in communities that might otherwise be losing population. Their children are in schools that might otherwise be losing enrollment. So they are vital members of communities in the Magic Valley. There are challenges that they bring insofar as There are still language barriers, and in particular, the challenge we identified is that many schools in the Magic Valley are ill-equipped to serve the students and their families if the students and families are not fluent in English. And so the barriers, to the extent they exist, are around language. And the recruitment of a bilingual workforce in schools, in the justice system, in the healthcare system would benefit the communities and the people who work in the dairy industry.
Good afternoon. I'm Charlie Garrison. I work in Washington, D.C. on federal policy issues, and one of the groups that I work with is the Idaho Dairymen's Association. I can tell you for IDA that immigration reform is priority number 1, 2, and 3. You might be able to go a little farther down the list on that one too. But IDA has been working on this issue for more than a decade in Washington, D.C., trying to work with the 4 members of the Idaho delegation to come up with visa reform that would be effective for the dairy producers in the state of Idaho. And we have been at the table for the negotiation of the Senate bill in 2013. IDA is at the table negotiating the bill in the House of Representatives with the Judiciary Committee now. Again, trying to come up with visa reform that would be effective, that would offer legal status, work authorization for the workers who are currently here. It would offer a new program that guarantees dairies access to workers who work year-round. And it would set up a new program for legal new workers when they're needed in the future. So those are the priorities, and we have 2 of the 4 members of the Idaho delegation on judiciary committees, Senator Crapo on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Congressman Labrador on the House Judiciary Committee. Those are the committees of jurisdiction for immigration reform, and we look forward to working with them over the course of the next few months to develop and pass legislation on immigration reform that works for Idaho's dairy producers.
Thank you. My name is Ali Noorani. I'm the Executive Director of the National Immigration Forum, and first and foremost, I want to thank the Idaho Dairymen Association and the Hispanic Commission for pulling together the meeting today and this afternoon's press event. I've spent the last couple of days in Idaho. Yesterday we were in Magic Valley meeting with dairy producers, and today here in Boise meeting with community leaders. And I have left the 2 days with a much greater appreciation of how much the Idaho family, who may have been here for generations, who is producing milk that families around the country are drinking and eating through cheese, and the immigrant workforce that has come here to achieve their own American dream. For the state of Idaho to be the 3rd largest producer of milk in the country, I can say, just based on what I've seen and the people I've talked to, I don't think the state of Idaho holds on to that ranking without the contributions of the immigrant workforce. And the immigrant workforce that we've met across the state help and really contribute to the dreams and aspirations of Americans and their own families. I think that the Idaho delegation has an incredible opportunity ahead to lead the nation forward in fixing our immigration system. For years, as we've worked on this issue, Republicans have always said that they didn't want to vote for immigration reform because they wouldn't get credit. Well, for the foreseeable future, Republicans get full and fair credit for everything immigration related. And whether that is passing immigration reforms that serve the dairy industry or passing immigration reforms that help and address the overarching problem that is facing our nation's immigration system, it can be done in a way that serves the interests and the needs of the American worker and their family. So again, we really appreciate the opportunity to come to Idaho to meet with producers, to meet with community leaders, and we look forward to an ongoing partnership with the association and the commission. Thank you.
How much fear is there out there right now, about deportation? It's pretty good. How much among the agricultural workforce?
So I think we'll both address it, Sean, but I'll start with Juan, and then I'll anchor that from what we see from our producer side.
There's a lot of fear right now amongst our community statewide. I was just reading that a lot of like celebrations that are coming up, like Cinco de Mayo events and stuff. It's going to have a lot less people attending because of that fear. There's a lot of false things coming out. We're, for example, on our Facebook page, every morning I'm constantly erasing things off of our Facebook page because people are saying there's a raid at the airport, there's a raid at the bus station, and it's not true. So there's a lot of falsehoods that are being posted out there as well. And so our agency has met with Boise PD and other police departments, and they're telling us nothing's going to be happening anytime as far as raids here soon. So we believe them. And so what we're really fighting right now is a lot of people putting fear into our community.
So to tag on to what Juan said, I was asked that same question yesterday, and it's only appropriate, obviously, that I give the same answer as yesterday. I was asked on a scale of 1 to 10, what's how serious is the fear level? And I said, well, it's at a 10. And I think we should all anticipate that with all the rhetoric that we hear coming out of D.C., all the rhetoric that was in that campaign. You can only anticipate that fear is that high. So when you look at the fear, number one, it starts with our employees. And so it's a moral fear more than an economic fear. Obviously, cattle, unlike construction jobs where if there's not labor there, you set down your hammer and you come back the next day. Cattle have to be fed. They have to be milked every day, 365. So you have that economic fear. But it's more than moral fear. Had one labor on one of our dairies in a previous incident came up to the owner of the farm, and to the best of our knowledge, all of our labor force is legal. They have all the proper documentations that we can assess. But he asked them, he said, if my wife and I are deported, are you going to take care of my children? So I think you have to realize the moral side of this equation and the amount of fear that brings to people that I don't think any of us can understand unless you're put in that same position.
So from a national perspective, I would just say that the president's executive orders have done a couple of things. And from a policy perspective, they have called for a real ramping up in immigration enforcement personnel and really, frankly, an elimination of priorities. As a result, we've seen two things. One is a destabilization of workforces across the country, where whether or not a raid happens, somebody's going to work scared about what may happen, and that has a very destabilizing effect on their ability to do their job. And we see this not only in agriculture, we're also seeing this in the tech industry and other industries across the country. And the second is that it's also the anxiety and the fear is also having a very destabilizing effect on public safety. When you have victims of domestic violence, when you have witnesses to crimes not reporting those crimes, the cop on the street can't do their job. The cop on the street depends on having a trusting relationship with the entirety of their community, documented or not, in order to fulfill their mission to serve and protect their city or town. So just the destabilizing impact of these executive orders and the rhetoric, I think, is having public safety as well as an economic impact.
This is an important message to deliver to the community, to our workers. So I wanted to add my 2 cents here. The administration is adamant that their priorities are individuals who are deemed a threat to public safety or national security. And everything we've seen so far says that that's true. The workplace has been the site of detention a time or two, but there's no evidence to indicate that workplaces are some sort of target. And that's important for people to know, that it's safe for them to show up to work each day. And they don't have to worry about their place of employment being a target for enforcement action.
And another thing that we're seeing through our agency is schools. We're seeing, since the election, we've seen a lot more bullying happening in the schools. We've seen bullying happening at sporting events. We've seen students that are not going to school because they fear being bullied. And when the parents of the bullies being approached, the parents are saying, well, we agree with what our child is saying, because the child is, being told, well, we're going to build a wall around you, or you need to go back home. And so through that bullying, the teacher approaches the parent, and the parent is saying, well, I agree with my child. And so teachers are also caught in the crosshairs thinking, so now what do I do if the parent agrees with the bullying?
So agriculture, they know this stuff. They know the importance of foreign labor. Who's not getting it still? Who do you really need to reach? Who's not getting it?
So I think the purpose of what we're doing is to reach everybody who might be in the middle. You obviously have those who understand. You have those who might understand and be opposed. I would have to say that part of what we need to do is elevate the debate so that instead of immigration being a back burner issue in Washington, D.C., it's a front burner issue. The fact that immigration won't be looked at until the fall because health care is first, taxes are second. We hope to get to it in the fall. It's a little sad. I mean, we've been working on this for decades. We in Obama's first administration, he was going to do immigration and health care. Well, he only got health care done, and after that he lost the majority in the House side, so he didn't move into immigration. So I think our delegation members have to understand, and that's part of what we're trying to do. Part of why we delivered the petitions to them. It's part of why we are working so closely with the Hispanic Commission that we haven't done before, is to make sure enough pressure and continuing pressure is put on our delegation members so it elevates immigration reform to the level we feel it needs to be elevated to.
Well, I think that by and large, the nation's immigration debate, when you look at it in terms of fixing the problem, it seems to always be driven by Democrats. I think that the Idaho delegation has an incredible opportunity because it's a state that increasingly depends on immigrants in order to create jobs and a prosperous future for American workers and their families in Idaho. So, as one of the most conservative states in the country, that whose economy is so closely linked to the immigrant workforce, I think that this delegation can really change the debate. I think that yes, it will take a certain amount of political courage on their part, but you know what? Good politics makes for very good policy, or maybe it's the other way around. Good policy makes for very good politics, because the best thing that can happen in D.C. these days is a big surprise. And a big surprise that leads to a reformed immigration system. And I just can't think of a delegation in a better position to surprise Washington, D.C. with some real political leadership.
That's really true. And I mentioned that 2 of the 4 are on the committees of jurisdiction. Raul Labrador is not only on the committee of jurisdiction, he's vice chairman of the immigration subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee. The other House member, Mike Simpson, has a lot of seniority. He's chairman of the subcommittee on the Appropriations Committee. Senator Crapo is on the Judiciary Committee. Senator Risch knows agriculture as well as anybody in the state knows agriculture. So the Idaho delegation is uniquely positioned to understand the issue on behalf of agriculture, on behalf of dairy farmers in Idaho, and uniquely positioned to be helpful because of their roles in the House and the Senate to be helpful.
Do either one of you Washington folks think that our 2 representatives from Idaho that, let's say, isn't getting it? Is there more that can be done to convince them? More pushing? Any advice? You say you're reaching out to the middle. The middle's got to go to somebody to express their opinion. Is that who they need to be talking to? Is those 2, or what's your feelings on that?
Well, our attitude, and certainly Bob makes the effort to come to Washington, D.C., 4, 5, 6 times a year. And immigration reform is always the first priority when he's meeting with all of the members of the delegation. So it's important for us, it's important for everybody across the country to keep the pressure on your elected officials, keep the pressure on your folks in Washington. Immigration is uniquely the territory of the federal government. Only the Congress can fix this issue. And so that's why it's so important for IDA to stay engaged with their 2 senators and 2 House members, but it's also important for us to keep working with other states, other areas of the country, so that the people we work with and organizations like IDA keep the pressure on their delegations as well.
I would just say that as I've learned about the Idaho dairy industry, a couple of things. So first, some numbers as I remember them. There are just under 600,000 dairy cows here in Idaho. That means that every day there are nearly 600 cows that need to be milked. That milk needs to be delivered. And the unemployment rate in the Magic Valley is around 3%. So it's an incredibly tight labor market with an incredible demand for skilled labor to get this product to market. So I think from our perspective, the question I would ask of the Idaho delegation is, how will they look their dairy producers in the eye and say, you know what, I can't do anything to help you survive? Because without immigrant labor, without a dynamic visa system that meets labor needs within the dairy industry, these are farms that are really going to struggle in the days and the years ahead. And I think it's up to the congressional delegation of Idaho to lead the way forward.
So I'd like to tie together two questions that you asked. One is who needs to be reached, and also why is Idaho in a unique position right now? In fact, I think that members of the general public need to be reached. I think there's a grave misconception out there in the general discussion that there are a flood of foreign-born workers coming into Idaho. In fact, the best estimates that we have are from the Pew Research Center and their work on estimating how many undocumented workers there are in every state. In Idaho, there were 45,000 undocumented immigrants in 2009, and their best estimate, coming from the Pew Research Center, is that there are still 45,000 undocumented immigrants in Idaho. That means no net increase. We know that net immigration right now from Mexico is zero. There isn't a flood of foreign-born workers coming into Idaho. And so our research really looked at what happens in communities when there are no more foreign-born workers coming in. And what we found is that there's a tremendous labor shortage at current wage rates. The foreign-born workers are taking jobs, willing to work at jobs that native-born workers are not willing to take at current wage rates. And so you see the labor shortage playing out in not only in dairy, but in other parts of the economy in the Magic Valley. And so you would think there'd be upward pressure on wages, but dairy is a globally competitive industry, and the margins, as best as we could see, are not large enough to absorb major increases in the prevailing wage. So they're really caught in a bind. And if the industry is caught in a bind, then the communities of Idaho are caught in a bind, because the foreign-born workers live in the communities of the Magic Valley.
A little bit, no, seriously, can you talk a little bit about the impact the scarcity of labor is having on the dairy industry right now, and what would be the impact if you had a significant reduction? Let's get to the worst case scenario. A lot of the labor force gets scared away. What would happen then?
So the impact on dairy right now is extremely significant. And what happens is we have one dairy, it's here in Treasure Valley, that his labor force is down 35% from where it was before. And so you try and get creative on how you're moving labor around. But if you look at all the economic factors that the rural Idaho, so I think you also have to look at broader than just the dairy industry, but rural Idaho, all the economic factors it brings, it stands on the shoulders of foreign-born labor. And so if there's a significant reduction, and it doesn't matter where that reduction occurs, but when labor's at 3%, let's say it's not the dairy industry that's losing labor, but another industry, you're in competition. Competition does raise the wages, there's no doubt about that, but there's also some people who are going to be left unfilled for jobs, or jobs that are going to be unfilled with labor. And so when you look at it, the dairy cow is a living organism. It's got to be fed, it's got to be milked, and that happens on a daily basis, and milking happens 2 to 3 times a day. And so it's not like you can lay down your construction hammer and say, I don't have the labor today, so I'll come back to building tomorrow. It has to function. If it doesn't function, then you have some choices as a dairy producer. Do you downsize and make the amount of animals you have equivalent to the amount of labor you need? We have some dairymen who are looking at expanding who won't expand because there's not a labor force. You will see some increase in mechanization, but that's a long-term process. That's not a short-term. It's a big investment. It's a long-term process. And quite frankly, when you're working with an animal like a cow, there's some mechanization that's just not going to occur. You need that human touch, that human observation for that animal. So there's no upside for a shortage of labor for the dairy industry. There's only downsides, and some of those are pretty significant.
So the industry has been looking at alternatives down the road if this never gets worked out. I think that's what you said.
Yeah, so you look at mechanization. So as an industry as a whole, robotic milkers are new and upcoming, and that works for some of the smaller operations. That nobody's demonstrated how you can fully utilize robotic milkers on very large operations. Eventually that will come. It's a very expensive proposition, so the price is coming down as mechanization is becoming more prevalent. But you still are going to spend at least $160,000 to $200,000 per machine to milk 60 cows. So when you have the average dairy in Magic Valley with 1,500 cows, you can't look at the current available mechanization and say that's going to work. Is the future in mechanization across all of agriculture? The answer would be yes, but that's nothing new. If you go back of how much agriculture has proceeded in the last 20, 30, 40 years, and mechanization has been pretty significant.
Speak about the real, like Bob said, this has been going on for decades now. What's the reality that something can actually be national immigration reform that can, balance some Americans' desire to have the border enforced with the need for agriculture and other industries to have a labor force? Well, what's the reality of this actually happens sooner rather than later?
Talking about percentages, whether something might actually be able to happen, there's room for a deal there. There's room for a compromise. If we can get, you just sort of have to take the two ends of the spectrum. You have to take those sort of off the table. The people who will try to block anything that's not perfect, and the people who will try to block anything, period. And then work, those. Okay, let's say that's 10% on both sides. You've still got 80% in the middle to try to convince that if you've got priorities on interior enforcement, if there are things that you would like to see on that front, if agriculture is happy with a visa program that you want to propose alongside it, then there's room for a deal there. And everybody gets what they want, everybody gets what they need, except for those two extremes that I talked about before. So I'm optimistic we could get there. We've got to clear some other things off the legislative agenda, some other priorities that have to go first. For example, the healthcare issue has to be resolved before the Congress can move on to tax reform, because you don't know what tax reform has to look like before you resolve the healthcare insurance issue. So things are kind of stacked that way. But we also believe that there's room for a message to be delivered to Congress that Congress does have the ability to do more than one big thing at a time. And so let's be working on, and we are, negotiating an ag package while the rest of the House is working on health care and while they're going to be working on tax reform. So if there's room to move an issue like immigration reform in the fall, I'm convinced we'll be ready. We're going to need folks like Ali and our allies in the general immigration reform community to help us try to keep nudging the Congress to be willing to tee something up. But I'm convinced we'll be ready.
Let me re-ask that. On a scale of 1 to 10, within the next 4 years, the first 4 years of the Trump administration, will something be done to address this problem, in your estimation?
I don't do percentages like that, and I also think you have to be realistic that immigration reform needs to happen in 2017, because as soon as the calendar turns to 2018, all eyes are on the midterm elections, and immigration reform is difficult enough to do in a non-election year. So we need to keep the focus on being ready and, again, working with a lot of different organizations nationwide to convince the Congress that this is something that should be dealt with. It's good policy. It's the compassionate thing to do. Business clearly needs this. Farmers know, other businesses know. There are no other workers coming behind people to look for work. So this issue needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed sooner rather than later.